Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are now live, and today I am joined by none other. Sit down. I am joined by none other than Stephen Bernstein. And if you are familiar with the film world, then this is a name that is synonymous with excellence and, just putting out phenomenal material. Mr. Bernstein has been in this business for a very long time, and some of the films that he's worked on are absolutely amazing. A couple of my favorites: Swat, Blade, Monster, and my wife's favorite. When I was reading your bio, and I told her that you worked on Underworld, because that is a film that she watches over and over and over again. She was just amazingly happy, and she wanted me to ask you some questions, but we'll get to those later. But ladies and gentlemen, I just want to give you a little background on Mr. Bernstein and what he's done in the industry. He is an ASC, DGA, WGA, and he's an American cinematographer, director, screenwriter, and author. And in 1992, he won the Best Artistic Contribution Award at the Tokyo International Film Festival for Like Water, Like Chocolate, alongside Emmanuel Lubitsky. I hope I said his name right. He also won a Cannes Golden Lion for his work in commercials. His book, Film Production, has been translated into several languages, and at one time was the best-selling textbook about filmmaking. Stephen was a 2014 ASC nominee for the Outstanding Achievement in Cinematography and 1 Hour Episodic Television Series Award for his work on Magic City. He is also a regular contributor to Sony Sign magazine, where he writes articles on various aspects of filmmaking. And he's also worked on a film that I absolutely loved with the Wayans, White Chicks, and so much more. He is a poet. He is an author. And, listening to him on Instagram and the approach that he takes to directing, but more importantly, screenwriting, is very interesting. So I cannot wait to dive into all of that. But without further ado, Mr. Stephen Bernstein, welcome to A Conversation With. How are you, sir?
I'm very good. Embarrassed now. I mean, it makes it sound like I've done a lot. It's just that I'm so old that when you take a long life and you put it into a 2-minute introduction, it sounds like I've done a lot. I don't know how much I've actually done, but I'm impressed by that introduction. So thank you.
You are so welcome. And again, just listening to some of your interviews. Oh, and I forgot to mention that he also is a part of a podcast, Filmmaking and Friends. Did I get that right?
Filmmaking and
Fans. And what was interesting, when you sent me the email last night, you sent me the link to that. And I'm always looking for phenomenal podcasts, especially film podcasts, to listen to. And I was unaware of that, so I immediately subscribed. So I can't wait to dive into the knowledge that's going to be generated on that podcast. And you interviewed one of my favorite directors, Ernest Dickerson, who I had the pleasure of meeting at the Micho Film Festival a few years back, him and his lovely wife. But again, welcome to the show, sir. I've listening to some of the things that you've talked about on Instagram as far as writing and directing and cinematography. But before we get into that, I'd like to ask you, how did you get started in the film industry?
It was kind of strange. It wasn't meant to be. I was trained as a writer, but read philosophy at university, and was recruited by the BBC in the UK. And so began my career working there. BBC is, and we'll get into this later, is all about conventions and orthodoxies and the right way of doing things. They have a particular way of doing things. I'm not sure it is the right way of doing things, and I'm not sure the orthodoxies are correct, just like I think a lot of the orthodoxies in Hollywood are not correct. But because there's money involved and because people are fear-driven, everybody's looking for the right way to do it. And so they developed a methodology, which is a great training for you to, as a filmmaker, as a writer, as a director, to understand the rudiments of how to communicate using the film language and the film medium. And then it was a crazy time then, because there are a lot of big music scene in the UK, of course, and a lot of these bands and these individuals couldn't get a lot of attention. So there was a guy named John Roseman who developed this idea that he would film bands against kind of a white or black background and send it to what were then called A&R men so they could see the band. And then we decided, because I was working for him at the time, that maybe it'd be a good idea if we put little stories around those videos. And maybe those stories became more elaborate. And before we knew it, the music video was invented. And I was doing lots of music videos with equipment that I think the statute of limitations had run out, that I borrowed from the BBC while I was working there to help finance these kind of low budget things. And the budgets became bigger and bigger. By the time Duran was, Girls on Film was shot, there was £1 million budget. So like $1.5 million in the mid 80s, which is probably like $6 million now for a music video. And again, a great training, the exact opposite of the BBC. So rather than rules and regulations, we could do absolutely anything. And everything became a motif. I did one music video for David Sylvian, who was in a band called Japan. And because we had been so exhausted, we did about 4 music videos in 1 week, a couple commercials. We'd been flying on planes, did a Paul McCartney live concert in Paris, came back to London, and we were kind of bored, and we thought, why don't we just shoot the whole thing out of focus? Because this idea that audiences want to see something, what if you deny the audience the ability to see something? So when they're hearing the music, they see these images that are soft or completely out of focus. They have to lean in, and occasionally we'll rotate the focus. So we did it. We shot it, showed it to the record label. They were not pleased. They were like shocked and horrified. And then it went on to win like all these music awards for most original sort of imaging. And that kind of then changed the way people looked at what we could do in that particular medium. The idea that, unlike the BBC, which is all rules, music videos had no rules. Those two combined educations altered the way that I approached a film, first as a cinematographer and subsequently as a writer and director.
Okay, so let's talk about, because again, just listening to some of your interviews, I was very fascinated about your approach. And the one thing that really stuck out, your style of writing runs counter to what a lot of industry experts recommend. Most importantly, outlining first and then write the story. And you prefer not to outline. And could you explain why that is?
Yeah, it's the most important thing that I have to say, the most important thing I write about and that I do. You know, precious and center to all my thinking and feeling is creative process. How we find that that responsive chord in others and find that secret voice within us. And the problem is when we are performative, when we feel we have an obligation to do something, like, for example, there's a lot of books out there about the 3 acts and the right way to write screenplays and Save the Cat and lots of others. And so when a person's just down to write, they say, okay, by page 10, I've got to achieve this certain individual thing. I've got to reveal the character, the conflict. By page 50, I've got to have the turn. The resolution's got to start at the beginning of the 3rd act. If you write that way, all your characters then work in the service of your story. Mm-hmm. And everything is in that service. And you never get to discover character. And in fact, my belief is that why people go to see films is not for the story, although everyone keeps saying we're storytellers, we're storytellers. My belief is that storytelling is a tool in the service of the discovery of the mystery of the human condition. We're interested in other people. When we go about our world, Floyd, we go out and we meet people, the minute we meet a new person, as you and I are just meeting, it's the mystery of that other person's character. Are they honest? Are they dishonest? Are they transactional? Are they trying to get something from us? Do they like us? Do they dislike us? Do they have a mystery? Are they cruel? Are they kind? We do that every single day, trying to divine another person's essence. So when we come to film, suddenly we do away with essence and we simply tell a story. I think as long as the story is told, the rest doesn't matter. When I mentor writers sometimes, and I say, tell me what your story is, they can go on for 20, 30 minutes telling me all the details of their story. I go, great, now tell me about your character. Usually about 2 sentences, and that's it. They can say what the person does, but they can't tell me about the complexity of the person. So I think that if you eliminate all those obligations to serve story to begin with, and then the other thing that I do is I dictate rather than write. I write very quickly, and I have my characters speak freely. Because again, when I free myself of encumbrances and just have my characters create a imaginative dialogue or monologue, I discover who that character is. I don't know how I do it. I don't know if it's spiritual or mysterious, but I know when my characters are speaking without an obligation to serve story, I find a truth in those characters that I would never find if I told the story first. So I'll dictate using this little device called Plod now, which I use. They don't sponsor me. I just something that I find that I use. and I will walk around the streets of Los Angeles or London, wherever I am, and I'll write a screenplay in 3 days. It'll be 300 pages long, long monologues, characters talking. It is the worst stuff you could ever hear. It's terrible writing. But then I go back, and as I examine what I've written, I discover the complexity of character. And then I begin to plug that into a story, and then use story in the service of the revelation of these complex characters. It's so liberating. I'll tell you this, I've never had writer's block since I started using the system. And every writer that I turn on to the system never has writer's block. The only reason we have writer's block is because we feel an obligation to write something and write something well. When we say that we can write something terrible, and I write terribly in my first draft, I mean, the worst stuff you've ever read, then we free ourselves, and writing becomes a journey of discovery rather than a job of reporting what we already know. So if you start with an outline, all you're writing is saying, now I've got to turn that outline into a story. The way I write, I have all these complex characters. Now I've got to use story to reveal the nuance of those characters. It's liberating. It's so much better. It eliminates most of the blocks and creates much more interesting and compelling characters. When we meet someone interesting, we're engaged with them. When we meet someone boring with a compelling story, we're still bored about them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you know what? It's so interesting. Years ago, when I used to write, I did what you just described, and I really didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't go to film school. So when I started writing, I didn't know anything about outlines and the 3-act structure. I just basically sat down and I started writing. And it's so interesting. I used to drive for public transportation for 32 years. And again, when I was writing, I would be on the bus and I would be talking to myself. And I would be actually having conversations with the characters in my head because, if anyone's ever written, your characters actually talk to you. And sometimes the people on the bus are like, "Are you okay?" I said, "Oh no, I'm just talking, I'm just talking to someone." So it's interesting to hear that is how you approach your writing, because I've found that writing that way, my characters weren't just cookie cutter characters. They were very 360 degrees, full-fledged characters, full-figured characters with backstories and idiosyncrasies, and they had foibles and things like that. But it's so interesting to hear you put it like that, and I'm sitting here saying that's how I used to write. I would just sit down and start writing, and whatever came out, and then, like you said, I would go back in and start cleaning things up, and it worked really well for me. But on that note, you talk about in your writing how most writers think about the pitfalls of thinking about where the audience will laugh or cry or react in the writing process, and how that can take away from finding what you just basically talked about, which is an organic story. Because you're looking, okay, on page 5, I want them to laugh. On page 7, I want them to cry. So can you talk about how that can really trip up a writer if that's how they're writing?
The great example of this is a joke. All of us are tempted as writers to write jokes for a simple reason, that we get an immediate bit of positive reinforcement when an audience laughs. But very often, in fact, most often, a joke subverts our narratives because it's not genuine. It's contrived to squeeze the laugh out of that audience. And it goes back to what I was saying about the 3-act structure as well. When our job is seen as performative, that we've got to make the audience do something, then we're writing to manipulate the audience rather than writing to the truth of the character. What you were talking about before, when you were writing in your head, goes to the nature of our experience of the world. I think the world is chaos. I think everything around us is chaos. I think our sensory experiences are chaotic. I think our relationships are chaotic. Our understandings of each other. You and I, just before the podcast, were speaking lovingly of our wives, but marital relationships are complicated.
Yes.
And if we think when we wake up that we know exactly what our wife, our husband, our partner is thinking, we are misguided. We'll be spending the entire day in a chaotic interchange of mutual need, old wounds, sense of responsibility, imagined futures, shared and dissimilar interests and ambitions. All these things are at interplay in most complex adult relationships. And yet in films, the relationships are much simplified and things go to serve the story. So I just don't think it should be that way. And I don't think that when we're writing a scene, we should be thinking, oh, this is going to get a laugh from the audience, therefore I better write this joke, because then the audience may think for a millisecond, yeah, I laughed, but I no longer believe the characters.
Mhm.
And when the audience stops believing the characters, it goes from comedy, and when you're writing comedy, to farce. And farce is absurdity, and when it's absurd, you don't care as much about the characters. Comedy always works better than absurdity. You mentioned the Wayans. I've learned so much from sitting beside Keenan, 4 or 5 films that we did together, and very, very close and like family to me. And I love those guys. But Keenan, because he's doing comedy, and there's something in Hollywood about comedy, is not seen as sophisticated. Keenan Ivory is one of the smartest, most sophisticated, evolved minds that you'll ever come across, because he's working on 5 different levels simultaneously. And when we were doing White Chicks, which everyone sees as this big farce, the interesting thing about White Chicks is these people are real evolved characters. If you look at them, each of the characters, you believe these are living, breathing human beings. Now, of course, when they're in the makeup and they're playing the White Chicks, that's meant to be absurd. But the relationships that each guy has with his wife, with his senior officer, with each other, the friendships between them, the friendships between the women themselves, those are really based on genuine relationships. And Keenan was constantly examining them, saying, would the person say this? Now, people would think if we're doing White Chicks, he'd just be saying, what gets the laugh? He was after the laughs, but first he wanted to make sure that the people were genuine, because when they're genuine and you create a laugh, then that's comedy. If it's not, then it's farce, and there's less engagement.
And that is so true, because I'm going to go back to myself. When I wrote a play, and when we were doing the production, I'm backstage and I'm just nervous because you're nervous because your production's on, and we're listening to the audience and they're laughing and they're exclaiming and they're saying things, and I'm sitting there looking at and I'm saying, I didn't write that to be funny. I just wrote it because it's real life. But when you're being genuine, real life can be funny. And I was very shocked by that. I'm discovering a lot of truths, talking to you. It was not me sitting down saying, okay, I'm going to write so they can laugh right here. I was just writing a situation where 4 women who were very, successful, couldn't find love. So then how do they go about finding love? And one of the most interesting things, that after the play, I had so many women come up to me and say, how did you do that? You're a man, but you just wrote me and my girlfriends. I says, well, I have a wife, I have sisters and things like that. And what I did was I just listened, and I just basically transcribed onto the page what I heard so many women say, and it resonated with them. But I want to talk to you quickly about how you cast, because you said something very interesting about when you're casting your films, how you cast the casting director, and how you also don't look for actors who look good, but you look for actors that can deliver the emotional arc. So can you talk about that, because that's very important.
Yeah, it comes from my training in the UK,
Mhm.
where the casting there is generally less about who's pretty and more about who's substantive. No disrespect to America or American casting, but
Mhm.
it's Hollywood, and very often in Hollywood, particularly in TV, they're casting very pretty people. I have no objection to pretty people, but I'm more interested in complexity, and I think the human face shows a lot of complexity when it's lived a bit. I think a woman becomes more attractive when she becomes older, for example. I don't think someone who is callow and 25, I can see it's porcelain and beauty and perfect. But then suddenly when I see a 50-year-old face that's suffered, that's seen death, seen pain, seen childbirth, there's a beauty in that that is profound and resonant. I'm not saying that to be poetical, but it's, again, the nature of the human condition. What's beautiful about it is what we all share. What links us together is the understanding of mutual pain. None of us get out of here alive. None of us get out of here without pain. And if we want to bond one to the other, we can look to each other's pain. All of us have had loss. All of us have fear. All of us have been rejected in love. All of us have, if you're reared a child, the terror of watching a child grow and worried about their welfare. We share these things together. So if you put a face up that clearly has never seen any pain or complexity in their life, how resonant is that ultimately going to be with an audience? Now, sometimes it can be an older face, and I naturally gravitating that way because I'm fascinated by older people's sensibilities. But if it's a young face, I want a young face that's maybe suffered a little bit or seen some pain or sees some complexity or simply isn't attractive because that's another burden they may have to deal with. It gives them a greater complexity. The other thing I'm looking for is that I do a lot of improv in my films,
Mhm.
much influenced by Mike Lee in the UK. And I love, as people talk, as I'm talking now, when they stutter and overlap and misspeak and repeat themselves. Because again, I'm going for that authenticity. And in real life, we don't speak like a script. We don't speak with vain elegance, and we stumble. We repeat ourselves. We have to repeat to remember something we said. We mispronounce words. We do all those things, and what an audience sees is, oh, that's us.
Mhm.
That's a person just like us, not perfectly attractive like a film star, doesn't speak like a practiced movie actor, speaks like a regular human being, is imperfect. And I think there's a magnetism to imperfection. And I think it's verifiable. I know, for example, Jon Favreau, another director I worked with, at the beginning of Iron Man, he had Robert Downey do a improvisation inside the Humvee, and what you saw there was a very neurotic, deeply damaged, insecure man. And to my mind, that is up the entire Marvel franchise. Because rather than going to core competency and saying, oh, look at all these wonderfully competent people with superpowers, which I don't think is necessarily attractive, instead, we saw a person full of vulnerabilities, again, saying there's a person just like us who then acquires superpowers. That is way more engaging as kind of the secret of what everything you should do in film is imperfection. Even in cinematography, when I shot Monster, which went on to win an Oscar for Charlize. Charlize and I talked about it, and we worked very hard on making her unattractive, even though she's one of the beautiful creatures on the planet, because we wanted to show the vulnerability of a ordinary, contemptible, but an ordinary human being, which was way more engaging for an audience. So that's what I look for. I wouldn't say I'm just looking for unattractive people. I'm looking for complex people. I'm looking, when I did the film with John Malkovich and Rhys Ifans about Dylan Thomas, I cast John Malkovich because I think he's wonderfully eccentric and in appearance and delivery, great mind. And we talked about the role at length, and he agreed. But Rhys doesn't look anything like Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas was short and pudgy
Mhm.
and round. Rhys is lanky and thin and kind of attractive, but he had the rhythm of speech and the complexity of personality that, to my mind, embodied who I thought Dylan Thomas was. So I didn't cast type. I cast the person I thought would be best for the role.
Yeah. So do you think that that is something that Hollywood and a lot of independent filmmakers, I don't know if I want to say are getting wrong, but are not really putting as much thought into? Because when I watch a television show, I'm kind of turned off when I turn it on and everybody looks like a Calvin Klein model. Because as you said, I'm sitting there saying, I can't relate. I don't think I'm a bad looking guy, but I can't relate because everybody is a size two, 7-pack abs, coiffed, gorgeous, and you're sitting here doing something, and I'm saying to myself, I can't believe that. And I find myself not even interested in giving that movie or that show a chance because everyone looks so perfect. And having lived 59 years, I understand that everyone's not perfect and every situation's not perfect. But when I have an entire cast of Mr. Universe and Miss America, it's kind of hard for me to really, you know, get attached to watching that.
You're exactly right. And look, here's the clue, I think. When we look at children and they stumble or they mispronounce a word, my son, when he was a little boy, would say wellow for the word yellow. Um, his shirt, he had a little pot belly, and the stage show, his little shirt didn't quite cover his belly when he was dancing around on stage. This is an elegance, but I loved him for his imperfections. I love my wife for her imperfections. Many things about her that are perfect as well, but her imperfections. My friends I love for their eccentricities. their obsessions, the extreme things they can't control, their impulses. That's why we're drawn to people, not for their perfections, but for their complexities. So I think you're exactly right. And what we need to get better at is casting people who are like ordinary human beings, full of imperfections, weaknesses, vulnerabilities, needs, desires, all these things that really define the human condition. That's what draws us in. That's why AI, by the way, can never replace us. What we want to hear is a narrative from other human beings, because those other human beings that are doing the narration are imperfect as well. We want to hear what another imperfect sensibility thinks of the chaotic world and how they mediate and try to figure it out, so we in turn can learn from them and try to figure it out ourselves. If a machine gives us an imitation of that, it's not going to be as engaging. AI does lots of wonderful things in the film industry and reduces our labor, but I don't think it can replace the creative experience.
No, it can. And, that was a question that I was going to ask you, but you touched on it. So let's talk about it. AI and how it is taking over so much of the industry. Writers' rooms are shrinking you know, because of AI. And now you're seeing so many more films using so much AI. Now, I like AI for certain things when I'm looking something up, or I want to generate an idea, and I'll just, pop it in and say, okay, well, give me an idea that I might not have thought of. But do you think that Hollywood is going in the direction where they're going to be using more AI as opposed to human? And I'll give you an example. It's a gentleman, Hilliard Guest, phenomenal screenwriter, and he has a podcast, Screenwriters Rant Room, and he talked about AI writing a script as opposed to people writing a script. And one of the guests on the show said the thing with Black people, when they go to the store, and especially with my wife, and this is my wife, she never grabs the thing that is sitting on the front of the shelf. She'll always say, reach behind and grab the third or fourth one,
Mine too.
because that's the fresh one. They put the stale one up front. She says AI can't hit that particular nuance when you have different ethnicities, or little nuances like that. So do you think, with Hollywood diving so deeply into AI, that type of thing is going to be missed?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think AI it does have value
Mhm.
for doing those labor-intensive tasks that don't have a lot of creativity involved. So I, for example, will write, dictate, and then say, do an outline of this, so I can see where my ideas are,
Mhm.
and see what I covered. It gives me an insight into what I wrote. But it can't write, and it can't write for one of the reasons you just described. It can't get into the specificity of a culture's character, an individual's character, but neither can it get really and understand the complexity of the human spirit. When a person might say what they don't mean, or mean something that beside dramatic irony, for example, has a great problem with sarcasm and irony and humor. And of course, it'll also take things from the algorithm, which are oft repeated, which we as writers would call cliches. So the problem is it's never fresh, it's never original, but most importantly is this sacred connection between audience and artist. And the audience wants to hear what the artist has to say because we share the human experience. And when we have a machine doing that, it's not sharing anything with us. It's imitating the human experience, but it isn't the human experience. So why would we be interested? I want to say to everybody, would you marry a robot? If it does all the things that your partner does, would you marry it? No, because we don't want the consistency. We don't want the repeat of actions. We don't want the anticipated monologue and dialogue. We want feelings. We think we're having an argument. We think we never want to have an argument again. But my God, can you imagine how boring life would be if we lived with a partner that always agreed with everything we said simply because it's AI? It's not what we want in life. So I think we're saying the interesting thing that's coming up next year is, what nearly killed the industry was my guild's strike a year and a half ago.
Mhm.
And because the strike went on for so long, no one realized that next year we're negotiating a new deal again, the Writers Guild. So, and one of the big issues, I'm sure, is going to be AI. And I think this time the studios and the streamers are not going to back down. They very much want it. Whatever I think, or you think, or the artists out there in your audience think, about how valuable the human experience is. For the studio who's looking strictly at a bottom line, maybe some of them don't care whether the writing's good or genuine, as long as it's inexpensive. And that's terrifying because I think art is sacred and important. I think it lifts our culture up. And without it, I think we're going to perish, maybe not physically or electronically, but spiritually. I should also make a correction. When we're talking about my podcast, it's Filmmaker and Fans. So
Filmmaker and fans.
I always mispronounce it, and my wife, who's more perfect than I am, sent me a text to make sure I
Oh,
correct it. So there you go.
thank her for me. Yeah, but you know what's interesting? Oh, I was listening to a video on YouTube. I cannot remember the gentleman's name, and he talked about Hollywood, the fact that tech companies are basically running Hollywood now is a problem. I said it because, like you just said, it's about the bottom line as opposed to creativity. And I think you see a lot of that in a lot of the movies and the television shows because, again, I don't watch a lot of television anymore because, to be honest, it's not interesting. It's very by the numbers. It's kind of against everything that you talk about as far as the chaos and just organically writing a story and fleshing it out and seeing where it goes. It's like, okay, one, two, three, four, five. And that's very boring. And halfway through it, I'm on my phone scrolling. Or I'm turning it off and I'm watching something else. But
You nailed it, Floyd. That's actually, they've actually done a study where, because everyone's doing paint by numbers with their writing,
mhm,
that by the 10-minute mark of most TV shows and films, they've taken these test audience and they say, we're going to stop the screening now. How does the story end? And like 85% of the audience could anticipate how the story ended after watching 10 minutes. Now that goes to my notions about how that isn't a reflection of life. Because when we wake up in the morning, we don't know how our day is going to end. We don't know how our month is going to end. We don't know how our life is going to end. I just saw a small masterpiece of a film called Life of Chuck. If you haven't seen it, I would strongly suggest it. But it goes to these big issues about the uncertainty of life. And that's its glory and beauty as well, because we don't know what's going to happen. When we go to a film and we know exactly what's going to happen, it's not reflective of our actual experience of how we mediate the world, and therefore, by its nature, is faulty. When you have a story that you can't predict where it's going to go, that's much more interesting. I know it's not self-promotion, but you know that I'm sure we'll get to, but I wrote a novel recently, which is, to my mind, the best thing I've written, a book called GRQ, based on the film, and we'll talk about shortly. But I want to mention it in this context, because first of all, it used the methodology that we're talking about. I wrote the book in a day and a half, dictated the whole thing without stopping. Went back, discovered the character, wrote it kind of as a free verse, wrote it without a narrative structure, wrote these 4 or 5 different parallel stories all together, and then discovered what I wanted to write about, which is this little fragmentation of consciousness laid out over a novel that I thought would work really well. But it doesn't bear any correspondence to any other novel of which I am aware. And I thought it would be absolutely catastrophic, but I had to write it. I felt this compelling desire to do it. Sent to my literary agent. She loved it. She turned it on to publishers, and we had these offers from like nowhere
mm,
for the book right away. And now the book is getting like all 5-star reviews, which I'm very flattered by. It's selling like crazy, etc. Now, why is that significant? Self-aggrandization, probably some part of me, some testosterone is kicking that in. That has to do with it. But really, it has to do with, I think, the misunderstood nature of our audiences in film and literature and the arts. They don't want what we're told they want. They don't want to be able to anticipate the end of the story. They don't want a 3-act structure just like all the other 3-act structures. They don't want screenplays written by AI. They don't want perfectly beautiful people speaking lines written by AI in a 3-act structure. They don't want any of these things. But because film is so bloody expensive, that, as you were rightly saying, the corporations and these streaming services now that big media companies own film and own television, they're so terrified of losing money that they want to know what the most conservative decision they can make is. Go with what everybody else is doing. Let's do that because it's got to be safe. Cast pretty people because casting less pretty people is more risky. Use a radical structure. It might fail. The beauty of a book is it's not expensive to write. So if I did that same experiment in a film, I would have been eviscerated. But in a book, I could do it, and it's the best thing I've written. So what does that teach us? That I should be writing books? Maybe. Or maybe collectively, all of us should have a different approach to filmmaking. So we do want to watch television because we don't know where that individual show is going to go. And one of the things, to your point, Floyd, about these corporations or big media, is if Amazon puts out a film that fails, they don't care. That's not where their money comes from. If Apple puts out a film that doesn't work, they don't care because that's not where the money comes from. The fact is that they can exist without us and without creatives and still do what they're mainly engineered to do, which is make a lot of money. It's a tragedy because when we have a lot of independent production companies and studios based around films, their job was to make good, compelling, and important films. We're just an auxiliary branch of these other corporations.
Yeah, and that's so true because I read the dailies, and it's interesting that when they're talking about successful, it's always about the number. It's always about the number. And every time I read it, well, they opened with a $50 million week, but the following week, it dropped by 56%. So the film's a failure. And you go down the dailies, and I'm scrolling, and I'm saying to myself, so what you're saying is success depends on how much money you make at the box office. And I'm going to have to look this gentleman up because he talked about the fact that a lot of the films that you see today, you can't quote a memorable line. He said, "Can you quote me a memorable line from Aquaman?" But he said, "No, you can't." He says, "But if I say, I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse, or we have what we have here is a failure to communicate." He said, "You know what I'm talking about?"
Or this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, or so many of those great lines from
Right. He said, "You know what I'm talking about." And he said, Hollywood has gotten away from that because they got so entrenched with, if we're not in the black, then it's not successful. And, they're talking about the exhaustion that audiences now have with tentpole movies because it's all about the blockbuster, the blockbuster, the blockbuster, as opposed to just telling a damn story. Can I get a story, please?
About real people, a story about people that we care about. That's the adjunct that I would add to that, which is we do want stories, but we want story about real, flawed, complex, vulnerable people. There's a life of Chuck. Look, you mentioned Ernest, who's remained a friend for Ernest. I've been friends for a long time, 20 years now, something like that. I did Bulletproof with him, and then I did Big Shot Confessions of a Campus Bookie with him, and then Galen Heard of Me did a film with him up in Detroit, and then Ernest, as you said, was on our podcast, and he went to Cannes, as you heard, and with a film that he and his wife produced independently, and a really good film with sharp dialogue, very, very smart, and nobody would buy it. Not because it wasn't a good film, but because, as you rightly say, it wasn't a tentpole film. But he went to Cannes, he found a little independent distributor, saw the film, and they and everyone in the audience loved it, and off it went. Now it's got an international distribution. So this is the problem now, is that there's a lot of films out there, and there's some really good films that will never see the light of day because independent cinemas have folded for the most part. The big streamers want the tentpole and the big names, and you can have a really good film that won't find an audience. And I think that needs to change because I think our culture is poorer for it. We're improved by art. And if we're being denied the films that we need to see, then our culture is going to suffer.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I looked that gentleman up, James Gray.
James Gray, of course. Yeah.
Yes, James Gray. That was going to bother me until I found it. But, and you know what? And with that, I want to talk to you about Monster because you were coming off of shooting SWAT and you get the offer, and SWAT was, action-packed, good film. But then you get an offer to shoot Monster, with a little known director at the time, Patty Jenkins, small budget. Charlize wasn't Charlize. She was becoming Charlize, but she wasn't Charlize. And you get an opportunity to shoot this film. And it was interesting what you talked about, the fact that you're on the set of SWAT and you thought that, as you so eloquently stated, that you thought that that's where you wanted to be. But it turns out that you didn't. And then you get an opportunity to shoot Monster and you take that opportunity. So can you talk a little bit about where you think you want to be as opposed to where you actually should be, and being happy where you are?
You're being very gentle, Floyd, because you didn't mention how deeply depressed I was at the time. There's only one thing worse than not getting what you want, and that's getting what you want. So because when you get what you want, you suddenly think that all that time you spent pursuing it, when it doesn't give you the satisfaction, or is not transformative, or doesn't elevate you and make you happy, then you're thinking, well, what will make me happy? So when I was in England and later when I moved to the States, I always wanted to work on some big films, and I was getting more and more studio films. And there I was on the 2nd Street Bridge in Los Angeles. We were crashing a 3/4 sized airplane. We had 23 cameras out, 35 millimeter motion picture cameras in those days. I used these lights called Moscow lights, which are these huge telescopic lighting platforms, and was lighting probably a third of East Los Angeles. We had parked about 8 of them all over the place. We changed the bulbs out. We did a wet down on the bridge. We had about 40 extras. We had what's called squibs, which are little exploding, bits of material with blood bags on top of them, with metal plates against a person's chest. So when they were getting shot by the machine guns, the blood would pop out. We had 3/4 charges on the various machine guns. We had vehicles with pre-cut holes that would explode on the side. We had 15 or 20 stunt people. We had a giant iron plate that was running a line with an eye loop through it that would pull the airplane onto the bridge. We had a big green screen up. I had, in my unit alone, I think we were 85 people there. The whole unit was probably about 300 or 400 people. And then we had all the extras as well. So, it was like a small city. One of my favorite moments of that day's shoot, by the way, was when some guy had stolen a car in real life. And remember, we had like 45 people dressed as SWAT agents on this bridge. And he stole the car and didn't know where to go. So the police were pursuing him. And he turned up 2nd Street. And then he went up over the 2nd Street Bridge. So a real criminal. And what he sees as he goes over the bridge is like 85, what he thinks are SWAT guys. And it was just a glorious moment, just seeing this guy drive by us, the look on his face, like, my lucky day. These guys aren't going to shoot or arrest me. But it was also tragic. But and then I got all the stuff and we're ready to go, and we shot the thing and all these cameras, and we played back, and what we call Video Village, where all the monitors are set up. We had all these monitors for each camera, and we played it back, and every single camera that on that particular take worked. The crash worked. We had a spark gun. The gunshots went off. The squibs went off. Perfect. Testosterone dream. And I was kind of running my part of the show and felt unbelievably depressed. I mean, suicidally depressed. Like, and I was getting paid it. I can't say that word, but I was paying a lot of money, something loaded money. And so everything I could possibly want. And it just felt empty. I felt like I was part of a factory. I felt a million miles from filmmaking or art or understanding or emotional resonance or connection with anybody or anything. I felt incredibly lonely and sad and isolated, and as if to say, that's it. That's everything I'm ever going to get from film, and it makes me feel empty. Now what? And it was almost coincidentally, I get this call from someone who I met when I first moved to America from the UK, and I was desperate to get some sort of job. And I had shot Water for Chocolate, and there was a thing called a word processor, which was all the rage in those days, later evolving into computers. And I took one letter saying, my name's Steve Bernstein, I just got here from the UK. I'm a good cinematographer, please hire me, and sent it out to 400 or 500 people, hoping someone would hire me. Got 2 responses, one of which was this guy named Clark Peterson, who was producing a film in Florida. And he said, look, I've got a first-time director and an actress you may have heard of, and he said her name. And I got to be honest, I had a vague notion of who Charlize something was. And she was pretty, but couldn't remember what she's doing. Just another, we were talking before about pretty faces, another pretty Hollywood face. They had no money. They were desperately behind. Things were going terribly wrong. And I still had another 3 weeks to shoot on SWAT. They wanted me in Florida right away to take the production over. They shot one day, and they had scratched the film, and they had 6 minutes on the shooting schedule. They shot about a minute and a half. And they were thinking of shutting the thing down completely. And I said, well, I can't really just walk off this film, but send me the script anyway. And he sent me the script. And I thought, wow, this is really interesting. This is a sympathetic portrayal of the need for love from someone who's a sociopath. What an interesting dynamic. And I made this compulsive decision and asked permission of the producers. I said, can I leave early? Because everything else we got is just pickups and inserts and a little bit of action, but not anything you need my unique skill set for. And they said, you're out of your mind, but sure. Because what they were paying me on SWAT was essentially my per diem on what they're paying me on Monster was my per diem on SWAT. There was no money at all. Stayed in this awful hotel in Daytona Beach. And we talk about awful hotels. You've really got to go to Daytona Beach to really, no disrespect anyone in Daytona Beach, but to really see awful hotels, you have to see a Daytona Beach awful hotel. And we went there, and I made a lot of changes, changing crew, changing equipment. We started again, and I shot this little film in these really difficult conditions. And we had very few resources, very little time, and a first-time director. And there's so many things were going wrong. The skating sequence was quite famous in Monster, the roller skating sequence. They had picked a location with a curved ceiling. So it meant that, very often when we light from above. But if the ceiling is curved, all your lights over on the left or right are going to be right in your shot. So I had no way of lighting this place. I wasn't there when they picked this location. So the gaffer and a guy named Ted Hayesh, decided that we're going to take light bulbs, just ordinary light bulbs, and get about 4,000 of them, and put these boards up with little fixtures in them, and put the bulbs actually in the frame, and light the entire place with bulbs in the shot, and cover the whole ceiling with thousands of bulbs, and then no other lighting. And it looked like it was part of the roller rinks decorations. Perfect. Except the heat became so intense. It was a very hot summer in Florida, and this was a tin roof, that these bulbs began to overheat. So just as Christina and Charlize began to skate, and we had built a board with roller skates underneath, so I could sit on the board with the camera, and I would lead them as the music played by Journey, and they would skate. The bulbs began to explode, sending molten glass over all the actors. So one by one, pop, 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 pop. And I thought that was the end of the world. And then suddenly, just magically, it stopped. We shot the rest of the sequence, and everyone still talks about the film went on to win an Oscar. So many stories like that of this little film. I went from all those cameras, all the technology, all the crews in Los Angeles to molten glass on a tiny little overheated undercrewed shoot in Florida. And it changed my life. And I said, oh, I get it. What we're looking for is not money and fame. We're looking for meaning. We're looking for doing things that matter. There's a great book by Viktor Frankl called Man's Search for Meaning, which if anyone reads, it changes their life. He was a concentration camp survivor and then tried to make sense of a concentration camp in terms of his subsequent life in America. And it's called Man's Search for Meaning. And it will alter your life. And then I had read it then, and I read it right after that film, and it altered my life. We need meaning, and art provides meaning.
Yeah, and we talked about that earlier, the fact that it was a human story, because although she was a psychopath and extremely disturbed and a serial killer, there was a sick motive behind what she was doing, because she wanted to be loved. And you have real people in society who have been damaged, sometimes extensively, to where they're not redeemable, but in their eyes they're looking for something that they never got. So the fact that you went from, and it's nothing wrong with SWAT, because I love SWAT, but to go to a real human story that people could actually resonate with. I'm not her, but I see some similarities there, because my life hasn't been that great in certain instances. So I don't agree with what she did, but see, I can kind of understand it, because I've been knocked down, I've been kicked, I've been stepped over, I've been talked about, I've been ostracized. So it was the human aspect of the story that I think resonated with so many people.
Spot on. And I look again. Again, it sounds like I'm being tawdry and promoting the book, but um, the reason GRQ, to what you just said, resonated with me so much as a novel, as I wrote it, was about a flawed central character. It's about a guy who invests everything he's got in. First, he's lied to his wife, always a bad idea.
Hmm.
He's got himself in deep financial trouble. His house is about to be repossessed, and he decides to invest all the money he's got in cryptocurrency,
Mm.
just as there's earthquakes across Los Angeles. Now,
Sure.
when people read the book, that a lot of them say, "I really like your character, but he does a lot of really bad things." And I go, exactly. And by the way, so have I. It's not autobiographical, but it's autobiographical the way you just described autobiography. None of us are sociopaths or psychopaths like Charlize was in that movie. But as you rightly said, we can identify with that desire to be loved, the recognition that even though we're deeply flawed, it doesn't mean that we mitigate or modify our need. If we could be the ugliest person and the cruelest person in the world, it doesn't mean we don't want to be loved.
Hmm.
Even though we don't deserve to be loved, it doesn't mean that we don't want to be loved. And that's why I'd have to say that GRQ, in respect to Patty and Charlize and everything, I think my novel in some way was influenced by my experience on that, in that I became more interested in flawed characters, because where we began this conversation, I'm more interested in the complexity of the human condition than just the polished presentation of perfect people with beautiful faces in ideal stories.
Yeah. But we're going to get to your book, but I want to stay on Monster for a little bit.
Sure.
Because you talked about the fact that everyone passed on this, everybody, because they were like, well, okay, we don't know the director. Charlize ain't Charlize. What is this all about? But then Blockbuster picks it up and they ask for a limited screening release. And then everything starts to take off. And the reason I'm asking this question is because you said all the executives said no. So I want you to speak to, if someone, a filmmaker that may be listening to this now or will be in the future, who's saying to themselves, I have something, but everyone is telling me no. So I'm going to put it aside and I'm going to do the cookie cutter by the numbers thing that they say will work. But with Monster, it bucked every single trend as a, in Hollywood. Oh, this is not going to work. So what would you say to filmmakers that may be sitting on their own Monster, the screenplay? Um, what would you say to them as far as going out and just doing the damn thing, for lack of a better
Yeah,
word?
and other examples from my career. I mentioned my friend John Favreau. Swingers wasn't immediately embraced by everybody. John, after doing Rudy, couldn't get a job. John
Mm,
Favreau could not get a job as an actor forever, and look at him now. Like Water for Chocolate, people said a film about someone cooking in Spanish became the highest-grossing foreign language film of all time until recently. Um, Noah Baumbach did Kicking and Screaming with me, and people said college students talking about their life in college after they left college. The biggest star we had was Eric Stoltz. Why would anyone make that film? Noah went on to get 2 Oscar nominations. So here's the thing. We're all desperate to please because we're all fear-driven. And we think that alliances, particularly with the powerful and the moneyed, will protect us and nurture us. And that is sometimes the case. But in doing that, we so compromise ourselves morally, spiritually, and intellectually that there's nothing left for us to actually enjoy or benefit from. So you've got to have an absolute and unequivocal self-belief, and you've got to basically say to hell with everybody else's opinion, and you've got to believe in your vision. And most of all, you've got to be very aware and cognizant of fear. And the minute you start making decisions based on fear, oh, I might fail in doing this, I might not get a job, I might get rejected, I might get ridiculed. Ridicule is a quiet sort of fascism. It seems so innocent when someone just kindly teases us or makes fun of us or tells us, "Oh, you're still writing screenplays?
mm,
You're Mr. or the Mr. Hollywood." They might call you if you're in some small town because you're dreaming big. To hell with them, because that ridicule is a way of suppressing you, because those people probably are jealous of you and don't want you to succeed. The odd thing is, for most of us, it's not enough that we succeed. Our friends have to fail. And we don't know that that sensibility is around us, subverting us and preventing us from being courageous. So I would say to everybody making a film, there's few things harder. And recognize that just the attempt to make the film, there's a profound nobility in that. And recognize your nobility in taking a huge risk. And there's a couple of risks. First of all, there's two main ones, but there's many, many risks. First, the risk will never get made and you're wasting time. We're all worried about wasting time. Take that risk, because I'd rather fall on my sword doing something I love than doing something that I don't love. Secondly, you're worried about whether you're going to be good at the job or not. Well, I'll tell you, I've been doing this nearly 50 years. I still vomit before every production I'm about to start. I'm so terrified. I am sure when I do a thing, it's terrible. I can't sit through a screening with an audience. Still, after all these years and all these big films and small films and commercials and 100 odd jobs on an enormous scale, I'm still terrified. But I keep going. So if I can keep going, and then you should. And if I think that failure is imminent, then you might, but that doesn't mean that it is. It simply means that fear is always present, and something that we simply have to overcome as an obstacle and eliminate it, which means that we all have to be risk takers. And by risk taker, it means we can't care about the opinion of others. And if others tell us that we're likely to fail, good, then watch us fail and embrace it. I say to writers, write bad screenplays, make bad films, but move forward. The great defeat for any artist, particularly for filmmakers, is to be inert, to do nothing, to be fear-driven, and then sit in a room terrified about a conspiracy or a failure or money or whatever else is you're worried about. It paralyzes you, and then suddenly you're dead. And where's your life gone? If you wait, it's like waiting for Godot. If you simply wait for something to happen, nothing will happen. There's one person who can initiate an event in your life, and that's you.
Yeah. And that is so true. And as you were talking, the greatest basketball player in my mind popped into my head, Michael Jordan. And he said, I missed more shots than I made. And he's got 6 championships. So you have a gentleman with 6 championships telling you that he missed more than he made, but he has 6 championships. And the thing with that is he was never afraid to take the shot, even though he missed more than he made. So the fact that if you're going to be afraid to take the shot, that's guaranteed failure.
Correct.
They talk about when you do a thing, there's a chance of failure, but there's also a chance of success. There's a 50-50 chance, but there's a 100% chance of failure if you just say, well,
Exactly.
they're right. I don't think I can do that. And, you talked a lot about the amount of failures that you've had, over your extended career, but you also talked about how those failures shaped who you are right now. So can you talk about that a little bit? Because
Yeah.
we're about to wrap up, because we're going to talk about your book GRQ. But I really wanted you to touch on that because you've been doing this for a very long time, and people
Yeah.
look at you and say, "Oh, Stephen Bernstein, he's such a success," but they see this part of the iceberg, but they don't see this part of the iceberg. So can you
Yeah.
talk
Look,
about that?
I'm sorry I've used up so much of your time, and
Oh,
I'm
no,
just
no, 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 not at all.
I talk too much, so we don't get to a lot of the points I know you wanted to get to. But yeah, I've failed as a person, as a human being. I failed as an artist. I failed as an intellectual. I failed as a cinematographer. Failed as a director. Failed as a writer. Failed as a thinker. Failed as a husband. Failed as a father. Not absolute failures
Mhm.
all the time, but things that I attempted to do didn't work. Things I got in my own way very often. And I was deeply troubled in a lot of different ways. And that could have overwhelmed and wrecked me completely. I could have just stopped at any individual juncture. Fortunately, there's this other compulsion in me that just keeps me going. So every time I got whacked by something that I had stupidly done, I wish I could say names, but there's a very famous director in the UK I was working with who offended me by being rude to a PA on a shoot at the BBC, and I humiliated him in front of the entire crew. And I'd worked with him on 2 films at the Beeb, and then the next film he directed, which I surely would have shot, I think was nominated for 6 Oscars. So, option number one, there's a director who wanted me to keep shooting with him in the UK and went on to do, again, one of the biggest films of all time, the 2 years after I left the UK, and saying, I got to go to America and try again. Another mistake that I made. Noah Baumbach was going on to direct a huge film in the UK, in the US, which got an Oscar nomination. I went to a film in India, which was took up a year of my life and nobody saw. I've offended people I shouldn't have offended. I've hurt people I shouldn't have hurt. I was absent for people when I should have been there. Bad stuff. No, not intentional malfeasance, but I was so needy at different times in my life that I couldn't see the woods for the trees. Now, what's happened is, as I've gotten older and I've evolved, I've recognized the injuries that I've done. I've altered many of the things that I've done. I've learned to recognize that failure isn't fatal. And so now I am much less fearful than I was when I was younger, and much more inclined to take risks. And all the risks I've taken have led more recently to success. I also am more inclined, I'm better at leadership than I was before. I recognize other people's needs. I know that people need to be heard. I know it's not important to be right. It's more important to facilitate others. So if I'm right and someone else is wrong, I find a way to maybe incorporate part of their ideas or show them that I respect them and listen to. And most importantly, in my ability to direct actors, if I hadn't had all these aberrant experiences, I wouldn't understand an actor's needs and fears and their individual damage, and wouldn't be able to point them in directions when they can draw on. So ultimately, the more we fail, the more we suffer. If we can keep going, the more we have to draw on as artists.
Yeah, and you said something that really jumped out. Being right. Being right will get you in trouble a lot of times. And as someone who's been married for a long time, that is a lesson that I had to learn, because early in my marriage, I wanted to be right. Being right will have you sleeping on the couch. The
Yeah.
thing
And
is,
destroy relationships.
are you trying to get it solved? Because
Correct.
if your thing is, I want to be right, you are going to alienate so many people, because you're going to die on that hill. You want to be right, but boy, let me tell you, and I tell young people that all the time, you have to figure out if being right or coming to an agreement and solving it is better. Because again, being right is going to get you in trouble. It's going to have her walking around the house not speaking to you for a week.
And,
But
and when you're on a film set as well, when
yeah,
you can point out to other people's failures, people don't want to know that. They
no,
point to what they're doing that's useful, give them positive reinforcement. They do something wrong, probably ignore it, but don't show how right or how much smarter than you are than people. The worst thing a leader can do is demonstrate how much smarter you are than the people that you lead. It's not something that you can do. You've got to show your humanity, your vulnerability, your weakness,
mhm,
oddly. And that's the best way to lead, is to say, one director I worked with, I remember, would start every day by saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm very scared. I need your support. Crew always rallied around him and did the best work. So now that's something I start every day with, by saying to the crew, I'm not sure of these things. These are the things I'm frightened of today. These are where the things I might fail. I need your help. And what happens instantly? The humanity that's exhibited on that film set all come together and help me.
yeah,
Vulnerability is one of the best ways to lead a crew.
yeah, and great leaders follow.
Correct.
Great leaders follow, because you, as the leader, director, whatever, you're directing the ship, but there's a reason why you have a team, because I guarantee you they know something that you don't. People
Always.
like, oh, I'm always the smartest person in the room. That scares me, because if you're always thinking that you're the smartest person in the room, there is nothing that you can learn, and that scares me quite a bit. So I try to steer clear of those people. But I wanted to touch on your book, GRQ. It's your new book. It's doing extremely well. We've talked about it throughout the podcast. But can you give us an in-depth um,
Yeah.
synopsis of what your book is about?
Yeah. Well, first, there's a film that we made about it called GRQ, which is my film that will come out later this year, beginning of next.
Oh, awesome.
And I was just very interested in people in crisis, because I've been in crisis. Trying to make a film is usually putting yourself in crisis and trying to raise money, which as independent filmmakers, you're always trying to do. So I just became compelled by the idea of telling a story about a person who's in crisis, trying to raise money. And now we introduce the element that's good in all drama, which is a ticking clock. He's got 12 hours to do it, otherwise he's going to lose his house. I'm interested in interpersonal relationships, particularly marital relationships. So I'm interested in a person who lies to his wife and is now caught in his own lies. I'm interested in earthquakes because I live in Los Angeles, but also that guy of existential doom that's towering above him and all of us as we try to find a way. And then the morality of the decision making, when you're doing something that's in the service of you and your family, but in the wider view, is it a moral act? Is it a moral act when you're serving those people that you love? So I want to take all those notions and I want to make it comic because I think the human experience of crisis is kind of funny because we become tragically comic when we're in desperation. And that's what I cobbled together. And then I was very interested in the idea of fragmented consciousness, that to my mind, I don't see things in a linear way. I don't experience things first as one and then another and then a conclusion. I remember things. I imagine things. Things are happening in different parts of my life simultaneously. So I wanted to create a novel that showed a fragmented consciousness. I wanted to be funny, and I wanted to have it on the edge of your seat. And I wrote it, as I said, dictated it as free verse really quickly, went back and restructured it, and then gave it to the publishers. And then I had not anticipated, frankly, that the book would be anything like the success it has been. It won the Literary Titan Award last week. It's selling in incredible numbers. And the reviews, I think that we've got all fives and maybe 1 4 or something. It just, I can't fathom it, because when you create something like a film, like a painting, like a book, like a poem, you always see its flaws and you can't anticipate how other people are going to respond to it. But GRQ is doing exceptionally well. And again, like that moment that you aptly pointed out on SWAT, and then I went to work on Monster, changed my life. Writing GRQ has changed my life. It's changed the way I approach narrative. It's confirmed all my notions that I've got about the way to write. I am now certain that to dictate, to not use outlines, to not use order, to write about genuine people and all their flaws is the only way that all of us should be writing. Before I was pretty convinced. Now it becomes almost like a faith or religion. I'm trying to get everybody to understand that if you want to be a great writer, free yourself of the rules of writing and write freely. And the great thing about a novel as opposed to a film is that when you're writing a film, it's always kind of a structure because it ends up as a movie in 90 minutes. With a novel, it can be as long or short as you want. It can be in any order, in any form, and you can have interior dialogue, exterior, anything you want. So I just let loose. And that was so liberating. And then it made the writing of the screenplay easy because, as you said earlier, I had all the backstory of all these characters already. I knew who the characters were. The story was easy. Story is easy when you know who your characters are. Character's hard when you only have story.
Wow. Well, this has been absolutely phenomenal. And I'm definitely going to pick up that book because I am an avid reader.
Great.
And, I love reading. So that'll more than likely be my read on the plane because I'll be out in LA in October.
Give us a shout.
Yeah, I definitely will. But this has been absolutely amazing. So any parting words for our filmmaker, content creator community? Any parting words? Any advice?
Yeah, it's about fear. There's a German filmmaker, Fassbinder, who said the fear eats the soul, and it does. And all of us, everyone listening right now is frightened of something. They may be frightened of failing in the making of their film. They may be frightened about money. They may be frightened about whether they have skill or not. To my mind, the thing that has changed my life at several key junctures is feeling the fear and overcoming it and going ahead anyway. So if you're thinking of making a film, make it. If you're being criticized, ignore it. If you can see no way forward, change the way forward, but keep going. But never surrender to being inert, and most of all, never surrender to fear. And never think that waiting for the perfect moment, that perfect moment will come. It won't. So when it's a matter of making a decision or not, make the decision, move forward, create whatever it is, big or small, on your phone or on a motion picture camera, and make something. And then once you do that, the next stage after that is easy. And going to the book, if you can't make a film, write a book, because once you've written a book, you'll have an understanding of character, and once you have an understanding of character, the screenplay will be easy. As long as you're creating, you're doing the sacred process of rediscovering self.
Wow. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have just been given masterclass. So I hope you share this with your friends. And where can people find you online? Where can they find you and
Well,
follow you?
I'll say it right this time, otherwise I will be in trouble with my wife. The podcast is called Filmmaker and Fans. So the filmmaker is singular and the fans is plural. I've got an Instagram page called Stephen Bernstein, Director Writer, which has about 120,000 followers on it. And the great thing I do there is I give little short talks about different ideas that we talked about today. For example, occasionally a live broadcast, and then I post things or curate things which I think would be interesting to other creative people. And of course, the book is on GRQ is on Amazon and in virtually every good bookstore across the country. And if you're in the UK, Waterstones and everywhere else. And the films are Dominion and which is Last Call, and my other movies are in the theaters. And you can look up on IMDb and see the different films I've worked on, including The Magnificent White Chicks. Wherever I go to speak in the world, no matter how pretentious I am and self-important about these big ideas, the first question from every audience, from Greece to India to the UK to anywhere in the US, is, what was it like working on White Chicks? And I got to tell you, it was a hell of a lot of fun.
I can only imagine the weigh-ins. They are absolutely amazing. I remember them initially from the In Living Color days,
Yeah.
and they are just the entire family is so talented. They're so hilarious, and it's just a joy to watch. What they've done throughout the years. But Stephen, this has been absolutely amazing. I'm definitely a fan. I subscribe to the podcast, so I'm definitely going to pick up GRQ. And I already listened to you on Instagram. And ladies and gentlemen, just let me say this: if you're looking to learn how to do things, right, and you're saying, "Well, I don't have any money to take classes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." One of the best things that you can do is you can follow people that have been doing this for a long time and they've been doing it well and they know what they're talking about. So if you're saying, well, I'm on a budget, I don't have a lot of money to take classes, one of the things that you could do to really level yourself up is follow Stephen Bernstein on Instagram to get free tips on how to do things the right way. Because if you were taking a class with some of the things that he's talking about, you would be paying a couple of $100s. But here you can get something free every day. So do yourself a favor and go and follow his Instagram, because I'm telling you, you're going to get some gems, you're going to get some nuggets, and it's things that you can incorporate. And this is what I love. There are things that you can incorporate immediately into how you are moving in this business. And you may be one of those writers that's stuck and you don't know why, until you heard what he said today about not outlining, just writing it down, writing it bad, but just writing, because you're sitting there saying, well, and Save the Cat, it said, or Kill the Dog, it said, and no shade against those books because I have them both, but that may not be how you write, because it's not how I wrote. So do yourself a favor and follow his Instagram. And I'm not just saying that because he was a phenomenal guest. I'm saying that because I want you to learn as much as you possibly can from someone who is successful at doing it. And you don't have to believe me. Go look his IMDb up. That's all the proof that you need. But again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for spending the last hour and 15 minutes with myself and the amazing Stephen Bernstein. Make sure you pick up his, because he has a couple of books out. So make sure you grab his books and grab his film production book. You definitely want to grab that. Follow him on Instagram. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to this podcast as well. We would definitely love it, and share it with your friends. And if this resonated with you, leave a comment on Apple. But again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining myself and the amazing Stephen Bernstein on a conversation with. And as always, love it like a hobby and treat it like a business. Everyone have an absolutely amazing, amazing night.